Welcome back to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. Hi, Laurel. How are you today?
I'm doing really well today. How are you?
I'm doing well. We have a topic that is really rich and a little scary for our listeners today. But don't be scared away because we're going to help you. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. We're going to help each other.
That's right. I
I know.
welcome any listeners who might be a little bit scared or intimidated about this topic because I'm right there with you.
I know. I know. So the topic is letting go of relationships, moving on. And when we're doing the beautiful work and we're doing our inner work and we're growing and changing and we're really truly living into a more authentic version of ourselves, we do oftentimes find ourselves moving on from relationships or outgrowing in relationships if other people aren't changing. And it can be very tricky to manage well and feel good about, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So much of
So
so
take it
much.
over, Laurel. I'm going to let you
Oh,
just speak into that. No, you're on your own. No, just kidding, everybody out there. I'm going to do my best to stay with it.
wait, are you moving on?
I'm
Is
moving
our
on.
relationship done? Is that what I
That's
get?
right. I'm going to give you the hard stuff.
Oh boy. Well, this is a tough topic because I
It
think
is. Yeah.
we, you know, many, I'll speak right from me, my
Yeah.
loyalty, I am deeply loyal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I, I am in relationship for many reasons,
Yeah.
some of which are simply loyalty, right?
Yeah. Right.
And it is a
Right.
really hard place to be when loyalty is not enough to sustain a healthy relationship.
Oh, they were like beautiful, and that was. I love that sentence. I just feel like that sentence in and of itself is one that everybody could is worth writing down and really thinking about and like mulling over a little bit. Right, right. When loyalty is not enough to sustain a healthy friendship, and we're going to come back and we're going to do a whole podcast on loyalty. So keep your ears and your eyes out for that. That's coming up real soon, because we do feel like it's an important topic to address directly. So we're not going to get into a lot of that today, but we will come back and hit that more fully in
Yes,
another podcast
yes,
because there's so much
yes.
today that we want to touch on and open up to. But I'm glad that you brought that up, and I think that sentence, literally, that sentence is a beautiful sentence to help somebody start to identify, if they are feeling like the relationship is losing its energy, losing your own personal desire to be there, your own interest, to wonder about where the loyalty factor is to help you sort through. Is
Yeah,
that all there is that's left? Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And it might be just enough to spur you into cultivating more, right?
hmm
So, I mean,
hmm
I know our conversation today is about letting go of relationships and moving on, but
hmm
sometimes it's just moving on into a different type of relationship, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes
hmm
you don't have to leave the relationship entirely to create a new relationship with someone.
Yeah, right,
And so I
right.
think oftentimes about family in this
hmm
category.
Yeah.
We grow up believing family is, you know,
Forever.
forever, right? Through thick and
Yeah.
thin, it's blood relation.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so how can you move on from an unhealthy relationship without leaving the relationship? That's one
Without,
question. And then,
yeah.
then how can you maybe move on and let go of
Mhm.
that relationship? I
Right,
mean,
right.
these are tough questions.
They are tough questions. And I will say for me, my lessons came early on when I was, going in my 30s, and I started going to adult child of alcoholics meetings and really looking at my family system and the relationships that were there and recognizing that number one, like, and we were talking about in our last podcast, taking responsibility for things that were my responsibility. And my dilemma was, I am a loyal person. I'm a family person. I'm a person who loves and commits to people, right? And so to be in that family of origin and feel like I still wanted to make myself available if I could. It was the question was how to do it in a way where I would only do it if it was going to be a healthy, productive, positive relationship. And so to begin to withdraw the way I was showing up in unhealthy ways just started to slowly change and alter the relationship, right? I was letting go in certain kinds of ways without abandoning the relationship, so to speak. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that is a beautiful way to say it. When you think about, you know, in a relationship, before we move on, how can we show up differently in that relationship or create boundaries within the relationship so that we can still be in relationship in a way that is healthy and serves us, right? So, I think there are a lot of things that are kind of the preliminary steps to deciding if it is time to move on completely from a relationship.
Right. And to find out if it's a viable relationship in any way, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And also to honor, like, with family, right? I know in my family, as I withdrew, right, I didn't have, like, my family didn't like come after me, right, and try to like insist that I stay doing certain things or whatever. They didn't guilt me. So I think everybody again is different, because in some family relationships that might happen. You might not be able to stay available to people because they might take take advantage of you no matter what. And so everybody's different. We're not saying you can definitely stay in a relationship or maintain something, because that might not necessarily be the case. Luckily I was able to do that in my situation, even loosely, but that isn't always the case for everybody.
It is not. And when you think that relationships are really the combination of the roles of each party in the relationship, as you change your role in the relationship will change, right?
Right.
And so even if, the other parties don't let you leave or move on, even if you are still bound in relationship, what changes can you make that will change the relationship enough so that there's at least, some healthy boundaries, right? Some reason for you to still be in it.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were talking, I was remembering, well, the first thing that came up was a great exercise that you just kind of ultimately invited listeners into, but we didn't say it directly, was what are the roles that you play in any relationship? So if you're struggling with the relationship and you're wondering, what's my part in this or what's not working, right? One of the ways to do it is to begin to identify, how do you show up? What's the role that you show up in? And if you don't know how to map that out or work that out, what was coming up for me was one of Caroline Myss's books, Caroline Myss, and it had to do with, I think it was like an archetypes book, right? Do you know what book I'm talking about?
No, but I'm thinking about the Sacred Contracts book that she wrote.
It is. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Right. And it has the 12 main archetypes, right? So one of them is rescuer, one of them is victim, one of them is prostitute, one of them is, caretaker or whatever, right? So how are you primarily be able to identify how are you primarily showing up in that relationship, right? And so for me, in a lot of my family, I was trying to rescue people, right? I was trying to be the helper, the doer, the rescuer. And so the moment that I started to withdraw and not be in that role, and now I'm just in a role of, hey, I could be a friend, or I could just be, your confidant maybe, but I'm not going to try to save you anymore. Suddenly things start to change, right?
Yes. I use roles, responsibility, and relationship a lot in my coaching. And, when you think about in the workplace, what is your role in each of your relationships?
Yeah.
And are you overstepping that role? Are you, is conflict created because someone else has the exact same role in that same relationship?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
once you start to really look at what is my role, and you can do this in your personal life just as well as in your professional
Work life.
workplace life.
Yeah.
But what is my role in each of my relationships? And am I taking responsibility for my actions and choices in that role?
Yeah. Right. Right. And how is there, I think we have like some spoken agreements in the relationship of how we're going to behave and what we're going to do and what we're going to take on as roles. And then there's a lot of unspoken too.
Absolutely.
And so to try to map that out is an interesting process as well, isn't it? Yeah.
It really is. And then when you
Yeah.
think about the unspoken, how do we come into relationship with these beliefs of how the relationship should be?
Yeah.
Without really kind of doing the self-check of, am I living up to my role in this relationship?
Right. Right. Right.
So much
And
of
if I
what
want to change my role or I'm outgrowing my role, how do I do that? And how do I do it gracefully or communicate that even as well?
respectfully, absolutely,
Respectfully. Oh,
right?
beautiful. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because it is our responsibility to enter into relationships and leave relationships or move on, with respect. That's our responsibility.
Yeah, right, right.
And I think that comes hard for women. I oftentimes we struggle speaking our needs,
Yep. I
using
know
our
I have.
voice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, decades ago, there was a book that I never read. I will admit this, but I was tempted, called Why Women Leave.
Oh,
And
I
you
haven't read
think
that either. Yeah.
that some of that is because we used our voice or stepped fully into our role,
Yeah.
maybe we
Could it have?
wouldn't be, with more respect,
Yeah.
maybe we wouldn't have to leave the relationship.
I know. And I think that speaks to I kind of feel like there's this unspoken spoken thing, right? And so when we think about historically how men were the head of the household, and I'm using this in air quotes, everybody out there, you can't see me, but if you're on YouTube, you see me. I'm like, oh, let's, be careful. Yeah, but historically, we come from that way of life. And yet, there's some natural abilities that women have to be a head of a household or the leader in a family system that if we aren't allowed to be that leader, to be we don't claim it, we don't figure out how to step into that, or we aren't allowed that, that's oftentimes where it becomes a very complex equation, right? To figure out how can we do that. And I do think I love seeing that is changing in the world. I do
Yes.
love. I see that so much in the next generation of families, people that I work with, the shared responsibility in households, women who are allowed to speak up and say what they think, and they have leadership and they have good ideas about all of it that can really lead the family well. So I do think that thankfully, I see an evolution of that. Do you feel like you see that too, Laura?
I do.
Yeah.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really challenging our own sense of role. And so when I think about, we're multifaceted people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And are we willing to have multifaceted roles?
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I willing to relinquish what I perceive my responsibility to be, to my husband, right? Like part of being stuck in an old system is my continual, repeat behavior, my patterns, my tendencies, my willingness to change.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And how dangerous it can feel sometimes to change. because as we're getting into this topic, and even just thinking in the family system, right? As parents, right, we generally want to be the protector of that family system. And so to change it can be a dangerous proposition, right? Because we don't know what the outcome is.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we stay and don't necessarily improve it, which is unfortunate, because it's like staying in, this is more comfortable because I know it, so I'm just going to do it, even though it's not really comfortable. It's not making me happy. It's not making anybody else happy. Yeah.
Right. And there we are, loyalty all over again. Right.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about, kind of, I want to leave our listeners with some thoughts about really taking responsibility for the choice of how we're in relationship with whom, right? How we start new relationships, maybe how we move on. I mean, all of those things, no different than any other part of our life, we have the ability to do. We have the authority to do, right? We can create our life simply by deciding where we want to be in relationship and how we want to show up, what role we want to play. And then giving ourselves permission, if you will, as we grow, to allow our life to grow with us and things to change, right?
Right. And I think as I was listening, what was coming up was our willingness sometimes to just say the hard thing. So let's think of an example. And I think this is just like an example that I think speaks into it really well is, if you have a friendship that you're growing and you're changing and you feel like the other person isn't, and the conversations maybe feel stale or old, or you're always talking about other people and you don't want to do that anymore, whatever it is, like, how do you, as let's say you start withdrawing and you don't want to spend as much time, and the other person is willing to say the hard thing and say, wow, it seems like you don't want to hang around anymore, and when now it's your turn to say the hard thing, which is, I know, yeah, you're right. And I think it's because, and then tell the truth. I feel like a lot of times we end up gossiping about other people, and I don't feel good about that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. It feels, I don't know, bad, or I don't feel good. I don't want to show up that way in a friendship. But how do you actually go out and say that? Well, because that does give the relationship, the other person, the opportunity to say, oh, okay, and lessen, because they do want to still do that, so they can go on about their business with other people and do that, or they can think about that and go, oh, maybe I don't want to either, right? And gives that relationship the opportunity, like you said, to grow and evolve.
Yeah. And imagine if we had those heartfelt, difficult conversations in relationships right from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
What if we really could bring that to relationships? Then we might not be at a place where we feel like we need to move on or get ourselves out of a relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I also think about everything in life, as we know, everything has a season, right? Mm-hmm. And so I often wrestle with this. What is it that makes me think a relationship doesn't have a season?
Right. It has to be forever. Yeah.
Right. And when I have two daughters, as most of our listeners or some of our listeners may know, and but when they were growing up, I used to tell them, by the time they were teenagers and entering into relationships, that relationships are based on the two people being at the same place at the same time, physically, emotionally, and now I add spiritually, right? But imagine if the end of a relationship was as simple as, we're not in the same place physically and we outgrow each other. We grow apart.
Right.
What if we're not in the same place emotionally? And it's as easy as when we're physically apart.
Yeah.
But somehow we put so much pressure, you know,
Right.
to keep a relationship going, even if we're not in the same place at the same time.
Right. Right. And there's not enough whatever else is required to remain witnessing one another or sharing, in a way that feels like it's worthy of your time. Because that's the other thing that I really want to say that I think is so important in the world today and in our lives today. We're people that often feel so stressed for time, enough time to do everything. And if you're engaging in relationships that aren't filling your bucket or feeling good, it's so easy to just be resentful of that and to also feel the more time pressure. And why are you giving your time to that? Like really, who are you serving in that? And how are you hurting yourself ultimately, right? So it's self-care. What we're talking about in this is ultimately really good self-care for everybody, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a great example. And I want to bring it back to my thought about two people being in the same place emotionally. If my
Mm,
emotion is resentment
yeah.
and your emotion is contentment, right?
Yeah.
We're
Right.
not in the
Right.
same emotion.
Right.
And
Right.
how can we bridge that gap?
Mm,
It does. I mean, I don't want to dismiss that relationships do take an investment of time and
yes.
emotion and
Yeah.
energy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that happens. But there are some relationships that really are not intended to be forced. They're not
Right.
intended to be a lifetime, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm learning and growing in a relationship and so is the other person, it's really a good relationship, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the mutual benefits of being in relationship, I think really are the foundation of a healthy relationship.
I agree with you. I do. I do. Yeah. So I hope as we've gone through this conversation with listeners that we've given you some thoughts about, just some ideas about how to move on, or how to begin to, if a relationship isn't feeling like it's fitting in your life or working anymore, like hopefully some suggestions, this idea of being able to be honest about saying, time wise or what doesn't fit anymore, or having that hard conversation, or just starting to, have less time, you're busy doing other things, like being able to just start to work with the boundaries, with communication, examining your role, changing the role, the way you're showing up, like beginning to do the dance of, if I need to move on from the relationship, right? How can I start to make the changes that I want to make before I just abandon it completely? Or if you know that you need to abandon the relationship for your own well-being, how do you learn to stand there and say, I know this is really hard for me to say. We haven't even hit this, right? So maybe this is a good place for us to wrap up. But the idea of how do you say to somebody, it's really hard for me to say, but I, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. And when we're breaking up with people romantically, we oftentimes we do that. Hopefully we do it well. I had a beautiful breakup once. I won't share it right here, but it was the most beautiful thing. This guy broke up with me and it was like, oh my God. I felt like the best person, but I was broken up with. I was like, what? How did you do that? um, but
That's
to be
another
able to,
episode.
that's another episode. But to be able to just say honestly, in a heartfelt way, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore, and you're probably going to have all kinds of feelings about that. And I'm sad. I'm sorry, and also it's not your responsibility to hear all the bad feelings either, or to be dumped on, right? You can, if you want to, but to just, if you're ready to leave, you're allowed to just say it and go.
Yes, and I
We all
think
have permission to do that.
it's
Yeah.
so important to think about that,
Yeah.
as we asking for what we need, voicing what we need, right? That is really our ultimate responsibility in relationships,
Yeah. Yeah.
to make sure that we're there for the right reasons,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
when we can't be there for the right reasons, that we respect the other person enough and ourselves to leave.
To let go,
Yeah.
and move on. Yeah. And
Yeah.
free them up to have a relationship that is really working for them, that somebody that is honoring them or does appreciate them in ways that maybe we don't anymore. And that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what a big topic, Laurel. It's a
Such
big
a big
one.
topic. I think we're going to come back and revisit this one again too in the future, don't you, Laurel?
I do. So much
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you. I was thinking about it just keeps like trickling into my mind. That book by Caroline Myss, What Sacred Contracts. You knew it. I was like,
Oh,
do you know that book? And you're like, I don't think so. And then you said it. And I was like, yes, she does.
well, this is one of my favorite books because it really does imply that our soul makes contracts before we come into our earthly body, and that the relationships that we are in are lessons that we need to learn in this lifetime. So,
and I think
it's
one of the things, and one of the things I love about that book, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Laurel, but was the idea of it depersonalizes a little bit the role by using the term archetype, which is really another word for a role. It's just a universal role that is in the collective unconscious. It gets into this whole psychology, soul kind of contract thing, but it's also real. It's a real, thing. So the depersonalization of it helps us to look at it more objectively and allow us to just look at the roles in a more just straightforward way with less energy, drama, or whatever around it, which is certainly helpful when we're talking about a highly charged topic, which it can be.
that's right. And for me, it is really what that book has changed my thinking about the longevity of relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
That,
Mm-hmm.
No different than a contract. A contract always has a term and expires, right?
Yes.
And so it has really given me some new thoughts about a relationship. What I might have thought has run its course and it's time to leave. Now I think about, again, the lessons of what have I learned through this relationship, and am I okay taking my relationship lessons to the next level, right? And walking away, moving on from a relationship, knowing that it was a soul contract.
Yeah. Oh, Laurel, I need to go back and listen to just a lot of what you said. I kind of feel like I was able to take it in, but I feel like you said a lot of profound things. So I'm just gonna have to go back and listen to our episode a few times.
I love listening to our episodes. I can't wait to listen with you. Okay, well, enjoy your day.
Thanks, I will, and I'll see you next time. Okay.
Can't wait. Bye-bye.
Me too. Bye. Bye for now, everybody.